What's up, YouTube? We're back. I'm not a fan of very long intros, so I'll keep this short and sweet. Today, we are having a look at horror games that came out on the NES. Let's get this show on the road. Okay, first up, we have got the torture chamber thriller, Chiller. Let's pop it in and get shooting. Chiller is a light gun arcade game, developed by Exidy and released in 1986. Upon release, Chiller sold quite poorly. Due to its graphic and violent gameplay, many arcade owners decided to not purchase it. In 1990, it was ported to the NES. In the game, you play as an unseen psychopath who must mutilate, kill, and torture restrained, non-playable characters. The game has 4 levels, where a player must accumulate a set amount of points before moving on to the next stage. In a nutshell, Chiller is simply a target practice game. As different targets appear on screen, the player must shoot as many as possible. You must also dispatch certain non-playable characters to acquire enough points to move on to the next level. The critical reception of Chiller was not good. Many people, including myself, found that the senseless violence and gore in the game was unneeded and a bit much. Especially the fact that you have to shoot restrained players that cannot even fight back. Now, this game is not for everyone, but it can be fun when played with a light gun. But I wouldn't recommend it unless you're a die-hard horror fan. On PriceCharting.com, a loose copy of Chiller is worth a whopping $126. Second on the list, we are playing Werewolf, The Last Warrior. This game, you are sure to liking. This action platformer was developed by Data East and released on the NES way back in 1990. The story takes place on Earth's second colony planet, called the Red Earth, which I can only assume is Mars. An explorer named Dr. Farian has been possessed by an evil entity while exploring a cave. He has now created a mutant army and has imprisoned the colony on the Red Earth. It's up to you to free the population and save the colony. You take control of a drifter named Ken. Ken is the last of his line, who comes from a tribe of skinwalkers, who have the power to transform into a werewolf. You start the game in Ken's human form, but if you collect enough power-ups, you'll be able to transform into a werewolf. When Ken is in his lichen form, his melee attack increases, and he can jump further and run faster, as well as climb walls too. Ken also has an anger meter. If it fills up, it will transform into a super wolf, and his attack doubles in this state. Now this is a pretty basic platformer, but for the price it's definitely worth checking out. Pick up a loose copy of Werewolf the Last Warrior for the low cost of only $14.99. Next up is the best horror game that you've never heard of. Welcome to the mansion of Dr. Chaos. Developed by a company called Marionette, this action horror game came out in 1987 on the Japanese Famicom disk system. The following year, a version came out on the American NES. The story follows a mad scientist named Dr. Chaos, who has invented a machine that can open up a portal to a different dimension. After opening the portal, different creatures and monsters began entering our world. Not long after, Dr. Chaos' little brother, Michael, arrived at the mansion, only to find it overrun by grotesque monsters. The player takes control of Michael, who must survive the infested mansion and find his missing brother. The gameplay in Dr. Chaos is quite unique. It starts off with your average 2D platforming interface, but if you enter a room, it changes to a point-and-click first-person interface. Throughout the rooms, you can find health pickups and different weapons. Certain items are needed to progress the story. The gameplay in Dr. Chaos is definitely a bit clunky, but I had a great time playing this classic. This game is rarely talked about, which is a shame, because it's an absolute must-play for horror fans. It's actually quite cheap too. A loose copy of Dr. Chaos will only set you back $11. I highly recommend checking it out. Next up, we have got Bram Stoker's Dracula. This horror platformer was developed by Probe Software and came to the NES in 1993. This game is of course based on the 1992 horror movie with the same name. For those who have seen the movie, you play as Jonathan Harker, who was portrayed in the movie by Keanu Reeves. As Jonathan, You must free yourself from Dracula's castle, find the Prince of Darkness, and end his reign of terror once and for all. Dracula is your basic platforming side-scroller, similar to many others of the era. It's a well-built, competent game, but I always found it kind of boring. Although the movie was an absolute masterpiece, the game kind of bites. A loose copy of Bram Stoker's Dracula on the NES cost a whopping $80. So I wouldn't pick it up unless you're a die-hard Dracula fan. Okay, next up we have the Will Harvey masterpiece, the Immortal. This is an isometric action horror game that was originally released for the Apple IIgs. It was created by a developer called Sandcastle and was ported to the NES in 1990. The story follows an old wizard who is set out on a mission to find his missing mentor, who has disappeared in an underground labyrinth. The subterranean maze has 7 levels. The player must solve puzzles, avoid random death traps, and find various items to progress the story. You'll also have to battle numerous monsters, including goblins, trolls, flying lizards, man-eating worms, and even flesh-eating slime. Along the way, new weapons and magical items can be purchased from a merchant using gold coins found throughout the maze. The Immortal is famous for its extreme difficulty. There's traps everywhere, and certain items you find will cause instant death if picked up. The Immortal is also known for its graphic violence and extreme gore. This was something that was rare on the NES back at that time. The Immortal is available on numerous retro systems, and 2020 was ported to the Nintendo Switch. Pick up a loose copy of this horror classic for only $15.46. This one is an absolute must-play game. Okay, next on the list, we have the cult classic, Monster Party. This horror platformer was developed by Human Entertainment and graced the NES back in 1989. The story follows a boy named Mark. One day, while Mark is walking home, he is recruited by a monster from another dimension. The monster's name is Bert, and he has traveled to Earth looking for a warrior to bring back to his realm called the Dark World. Before Mark can even say yes, Bert fuses with Mark, Dragon Ball Z style. Now, in their new shared body, if Mark collects enough power-ups, he can transform into a monster. The bizarre story then takes us to the Dark World, where Mark will battle many creatures and monsters. Many are parodies of Hollywood movie monsters, such as Medusa, the Mummy, and even the creature from the Black Lagoon. There's 8 side-scrolling levels, each with their own boss. Mark must find each boss in each level, which is hidden behind a random door. Only then can he move on to the next stage. Legend has it there was even an unreleased Japanese version for the Famicom, with a darker story and more graphic imagery and gore. Monster Party is one of the more obscure games available on the NES, but it's definitely worth checking out. Over the years, it has developed a cult following. I would highly recommend checking out Monster Party. Pick up this horror classic for $21. The next game that we're having a look at is based on a movie that terrified me when I was a kid. To this day, I do not like swimming in the ocean. I'm more of a lake man. Let's sink our teeth into Jaws. This 8-bit action game is loosely based on the horror franchise Jaws, but mostly follows the franchise's most personal title, Jaws 4: The Revenge.
Jaws: The Revenge. This time, it's personal. Rated PG-13.
This game came to the NES back in 1987 and was developed by Atlas, but was mostly subcontracted out to a developer called Westone. The gameplay in Jaws is kind of complicated. You start out on a boat cruising around an overworld map, where you can randomly encounter Jaws and other sea life. During these encounters, the gameplay switches to a side view. You will have to worry not only about Jaws during these attacks, but other sea life such as small sharks, manta rays, and even jellyfish. During these encounters, after dispatching different creatures, you can collect seashells, which are used as currency to upgrade your weapons and buy depth charges. Using these depth charges, you can do some serious damage to Jaws. Once Jaws has sustained enough damage, the gameplay switches to a first-person mode, where you must wait for Jaws to breach the water and strike him with your boat. Now this is definitely more of an action game, but it's still based on one of the scariest horror movies I've ever seen, so I had to include it on the list. There's even a bonus game where you bomb jellyfish from an airplane. It's literally like shooting fish in a barrel, but it's fun. Jaws is still a game that is very affordable on the NES. Pick up a loose copy for only $8. Okay, the next game on the list is a rare one. Let's play Frankenstein, The Monster Returns. This is another obscure NES game that seems to have flown under the radar for a lot of people. Developed by a Japanese company called Tosei, Frankenstein came to the NES back in 1991. Now I'll admit, this game has kind of a bizarre plot. The story takes place years after Dr. Frankenstein had originally created his monster. The Frankenstein monster has returned from the grave and has amassed an army of the undead. Together, they have began attacking small villages and towns. You take control of a young swordsman whose wife has been kidnapped by the evil monster. You then set out on a mission to rescue your wife and slay the monster once and for all. The gameplay is another side-scrolling beat-em-up, where you begin barehanded, but can find clubs, swords, and even magical power-ups. Frankenstein is a well-built action platformer and definitely worth checking out. Unfortunately, it is not cheap. A loose copy of Frankenstein goes for $148. Up next, we have an absolute classic. Welcome to Castle Shadowgate. This is a point-and-click adventure horror game that originally came out on the Macintosh PC. In 1989, it was ported to the NES. Shadowgate takes place in the fictional world of Tarkus, where an evil warlock plans to summon the Titans and take over the realm. You play as a warrior king who has entered Castle Shadowgate on a mission to slay the evil warlock and stop the Titans. The player must explore the castle and solve a series of puzzles to gain access to the warlock's chambers. Instant death will occur if any of the puzzles are done incorrectly, and this will happen a lot. A large part of the problem-solving process in Shadowgate is simple trial and error. As you explore the castle, you must keep a lit torch at your side, otherwise you will face sure death. There's quite a few torches throughout the castle, but they are limited. This acts as kind of a time limit in the game. Similar to games like the Immortal, certain items will cause instant death if picked up. Each time your player dies, text will appear describing the death in vivid detail. This was something not seen on NES games at this time. All in all, Shadowgate is a must-play game. And it's very affordable too. On PriceSharing.com, a list copy of Shadowgate goes for only $12.39. I highly recommend checking out this classic. Up next, we have an LJN classic. Let's play A Nightmare on Elm Street. This action horror was developed by Rare and came to the NES in October of 1990. Nightmare on Elm Street is of course based on the Wes Craven masterpiece of the same name.
Every town has an Elm Street.
The game starts off on Elm Street. There'll be a series of houses, but only one can be entered. Along the way, you'll have to battle different creatures like zombies and giant worms. Now, once you've found the house, entering it can be kind of a problem, as you must be in the exact correct area to enter. Once you've entered a house, you cannot leave until all of Freddy Krueger's bones have been located. The mission in the game is to find all of his bones throughout the different houses, so they can be destroyed in the school furnace. One of the most interesting things about this game is the sleep mechanic. Throughout the game, different pickups such as coffee can be found that will help your character to stay awake. But if you're not careful, your character will fall asleep. Here in the dream world, you will face more dangerous, terrifying creatures. The only way to wake up is to find a hidden boombox and turn it on. The noise will wake your character from the nightmare, so they can continue their mission and destroy Freddy. Once all of Freddy's bones have been located, you will face Freddy in a boss match. After you've defeated him, you will gain a key that will give access to the next house. Despite being a game published by LJN, Nightmare on Elm Street is a very good game and worth checking out. Unfortunately, it is not cheap. A loose copy will set you back around $64. Next on the list, we have another incredibly rare game. Let's play Zombie Nation. This weird zombie shoot-'em-up was developed by a Japanese company called Kaze. It was released on the NES in 1991. In Zombie Nation, an evil alien called Darkseid has crash-landed in New York City and changed all the people into zombies. Using magnetic powers, the sinister alien has also taken over all the weapons in the United States, which is probably a lot. It has also taken over a legendary samurai sword called the Shura. You take control of an ancient floating samurai head who has come to America to stop the Darkseid and reclaim his ancient sword. As you can see, it's a classic shmup. Different enemies such as tanks, explosions, and airplanes will do damage to your floating head. But you can gain health pickups by eating the people that fall from the buildings. Eventually, you'll even face off with the Statue of Liberty in a one-on-one brawl. This is a weird, unique, and very fun game, but not quite worth what you pay for it. This game is extremely rare and very expensive. A loose copy of Zombie Nation is worth $512. This is one where it might be worth looking for a ROM hack or using emulation. Well, so far, we've had a look at 12 different NES horror games. It only makes sense that the next game we play is Friday the 13th. This LJN classic slashed its way onto the NES in 1989 and was developed by Atlas. Players take control of counselors at Camp Crystal Lake as they attempt to stop Jason Voorhees and save the kids. There's 6 different playable characters. The mission is to simply survive for 3 nights and save as many counselors and kids as you can from Jason. Friday takes place in a 2D open world plane. As you explore Camp Crystal Lake, you can enter the lake, as well as the woods, caves, and of course cabins. When a cabin or cave is entered, the perspective changes to a first-person interface, similar to Dr. Chaos. Different items and weapons can be found in these caves and cabins. At random points, Jason can come out of nowhere and attack you. All you have to do to defend yourself are rocks. You'll also have to worry about zombies, wolves, and bats. The map is a very important tool when navigating Camp Crystal Lake. As you can see, it's a very large park, and it's very easy to get lost without referencing it. At random points, you will receive an alert that Jason is about to kill one of the kids. By referencing the overworld map, you can see where they are and attempt to save them. During these fights, the perspective changes to an interface similar to Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! Only instead of throwing punches, you're throwing rocks. Now this game can be a bit confusing to play at first, but once you get a hang of it, you'll find that there's a lot to sink your teeth into. Pick up a copy of this 8-bit survival horror classic for only $15.
So change your mind or what, Melissa?
Next on the list is another game that you probably haven't heard of. Get ready for Phantom Fighter. This supernatural beat-em-up was developed by Marionette and came to the American NES in 1990. The Japanese version was released 2 years earlier and is based on the 1985 Hong Kong horror movie called Mr. Vampire. plot follows a kung fu master and his apprentice as they fight their way through small towns infested with creatures called Qianqi. Qianqi, also known as Chinese hopping vampires, are reanimated corpses from Chinese folklore. They are typically depicted as stiff corpses dressed in official garments from the Qing dynasty. To feed, Qianqis drain their victims of the qi, also known as life force. There's 8 different towns in total, each with several Qianqis to defeat, as well as a boss. There's also kung fu dojos in each town. As you defeat Qianqis, you will be awarded scrolls. These scrolls can be used to learn new attacks in the martial arts schools. The combat in Phantom Fighter can be a bit clunky, but gets much easier as you learn new techniques. The sprite animation is very smooth as well. This is yet another obscure NES game that almost no one talks about. Luckily, this is another one that's quite cheap. Pick up a copy of this Kung Fu classic for only $15. Before we have a look at the final 3 games on our list, here are some more games available on the NES and Japanese Famicom that I think are worthwhile checking out if you're a fan of horror games. Next up, we have a point-and-click masterpiece. Welcome to Maniac Mansion. This horror adventure game came to the NES back in 1990, but was originally released on the Commodore 64. Maniac Mansion was Lucasfilm's first self-published game. Maniac Mansion is the brainchild of Ron Gilbert and Gary Winnick. In 1985, the pair decided they wanted to create a humorous video game based on B-horror movie cliches. The story follows teenage protagonist Dave Miller as he attempts to rescue his girlfriend, Sandy, from a mad scientist. The mad scientist has been taken over by a sentient meteor that had crash-landed in his backyard the previous day. The player takes control of Dave as well as 2 other characters. There are 6 playable characters in total. Gameplay is non-linear and changes depending on the characters you choose and the choices you make. The point-and-click interface allows the player to thoroughly explore their environment, which is important as there's many different ways to complete this game. Due to the fact that there's many ways to complete Maniac Mansion, it gives the game a lot of replayability, which is a nice bonus these days. At any point you can switch back to one of your other characters that are outside, and carry on the game from there. This is a must-play horror game for fans of the NES. I would highly recommend checking it out. Although rare, it's still surprisingly cheap too. A loose copy is worth about $25 on Pricejarn.com. Second last on the list, we have Shadowgate's older brother. Let's play Uninvited. Uninvited is another point-and-click horror game developed by Icom Simulations and originally released for the Macintosh PC. The plot follows an unnamed protagonist who must explore a creepy abandoned house and rescue his missing sister. The game starts out with your character waking up in his car as he has recently been knocked out in a car crash. After realizing that his older sister is missing, your character decides to investigate a house not far from where the car accident occurred. As you explore the house, different diaries and journals will slowly reveal that the house was once home to a group of sorcerers. Evidently, it seems one of the apprentices was corrupted by dark magic and went on a killing spree. The massacre left the house haunted with evil spirits. The main house consists of 2 floors, as well as a tower. In the backyard there's also a greenhouse, an observatory, and a chapel. Behind the chapel, there is a maze-like cemetery. The main chunk of gameplay involves finding items and solving puzzles. Similar to Shadowgate, if certain puzzles are done incorrectly, instant death will occur. The graphics and story in Uninvited make for a truly horrifying experience. The music is quite creepy as well. It's a must-play for horror fans. The best way to play the Uninvited, in my opinion, is a collection on the PS4 and Xbox One called the 8-Bit Adventure Anthology. This collection includes the Uninvited, Shadowgate, as well as Deja Vu. If you want a copy on the NES, good luck finding one for a good price. Unfortunately, this game is not cheap. On Pricechart.com, a loose copy is worth $94. Okay, the last game on our list was only released in Japan, but many consider it to be the mother of modern-day horror games. Get ready for Sweet Home. Sweet Home was developed and published by Capcom and was released on the Japanese Famicom in 1989. Sweet Home was developed on the Japanese Famicom while the movie was being filmed. Promotion and advertisement were done at the same time. In the end, many people thought that the game turned out better than the movie, and I'd have to agree. But the movie is still a pretty good watch. I definitely recommend it. If you're interested, you can watch it on YouTube with English subtitles for free. This game was directed by Takuro Fujiwara, a veteran developer who has directed games such as Ghosts and Goblins and Mega Man 2. Sweet Home is based on the Japanese horror movie of the same name, and tells the story of 5 filmmakers who have entered an abandoned mansion in search of rare frescoes. If you don't know what frescoes are, you're not alone. Neither did I. Apparently frescoes are a rare form of murals painted on walls. The mansion's owner was a famous painter named Ichiro Mamiya. Upon entering the mansion, the group are trapped inside by the ghost of an unknown woman. Before vanishing, the angry spirit threatens to kill everyone in the group. The team decides to split up and find a way out. Sweet Home, although a horror game, is also an RPG. People who have played games like Final Fantasy will feel right at home here. There's 5 playable characters in total, each with their own unique item and ability. You can explore the mansion solo, or travel in groups. You can only have 3 people in each party, but you can switch to a different character whenever you want. As you explore the mansion, you will need to solve puzzles and pay close attention to item management. Like most RPGs, you will randomly encounter different enemies. At times, you will have to battle them. At other points, they will simply take you to different parts of the mansion. Combat takes place in a first-person, turn-based format. You will come across a variety of enemies in the mansion, including ghosts, zombies, demons, and even evil dolls. The story is told through cutscenes as well as journals and notes found throughout the mansion. There's even quick-time events. At certain points, your player will encounter traps that will need quick-thinking reflexes to survive. Should someone from your party die, permadeath occurs and the game continues on without them. There's 5 different endings in total, available depending on how many characters are alive at the end of the game. The story in Sweet Home makes for a compelling playthrough. Eventually, you discover that the angry spirit is Ichiro's wife, Lady Mamiya. In the past, their 2-year-old son suffered a tragic accident and was burned alive. Lady Mamiya began killing children, so the spirit of her son would have playmates in the afterlife. Eventually, she took her own life. Due to the guilt, she became an evil spirit, trapped in the mansion. Due to the disturbing story and graphic imagery, Sweet Home was not released outside of Japan. But you can buy English translation ROM hacks online. That's what I'm playing here. Since Sweet Home's release in 1989, it has had quite a legacy. In 1993, Shinji Mikami and Takuro Fujiwara began development on a Sweet Home 3D remake. Eventually, they decided on a new story with different characters. That game went on to become Biohazard, also known as Resident Evil. Resident Evil is, of course, the game that first coined the phrase survival horror, and has went on to become arguably the most popular horror franchise of all time. I've even heard a rumor that the character in Sweet Home Asuka, who has the vacuum, was the original inspiration for the Poltergeist 3000 in Luigi's Mansion. Although, that's just a rumor. In retrospect, Sweet Home is a landmark horror game, and an absolute must-play for horror fans or even gamers that enjoy a solid RPG. A loose copy of Sweet Home goes for $46, but will only play on a Japanese Famicom. If you don't speak Japanese, your best bet is an English translation ROM hack. These cost anywhere from $25 to $75. While we're on the topic of ROM hacks, I really should bring attention to the fact that they really are a wiser option for certain titles. I, of course, prefer buying authentic games, but some of these titles, such as Chiller or Zombie Nation, are just way too expensive to justify buying a legit copy of. I recommend buying a modern console, such as the FC Twin, that plays NES carts, as certain ROM hacks do have issues playing on original hardware. Well guys, that is it. That's all for horror on the NES. Thanks for watching, I really appreciate it. If there's any games that I missed that should have been on this list, let me know in the comments below. Maybe one day I'll make a part 2. Until then, thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.